Hey, DawgNation, my name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's great to have you with us here on this Monday. We're going to be fully loaded today. It's Chip Towers later on with a recap of what happened on Saturday during the first scrimmage for Georgia this spring inside Sanford Stadium. Some very interesting pieces of information coming out of that. Also, it's a big weekend for the Diamond Dogs. We'll celebrate their series win against Vanderbilt with Mike Morgan from the SEC Network. We'll also talk a little football with Mike, too. I'm going to begin today with some interesting, you can decide for yourself what it means, tidbits involving the 2020 recruiting class. There was a little bit from Kirby Smart on Dwan Mathis, the four-star quarterback. So we're going to try to cram this all into the next hour. We'll let you judge and see how well we do it all. Nonetheless, we're glad you're with us as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
A lot on the scrimmage from Saturday coming up. I was there. I had a chance to see like a very, very, very small bit of the practice on Saturday. What I did see was interesting. What we heard from Kirby Smart after it was even more interesting than that. We'll probably deal with this a bit over the course of the next couple of days. But let me start with what I thought was kind of interesting on Twitter this weekend, and I'll allow you to kind of join me in pontificating out loud about what all of this means. Odds are it may add up to be nothing, but it is at least interesting nonetheless. One of the five-star recruits that's already RSVP'd for G-Day coming up on April 20th is Keely Ringo, the really good-looking defensive back out of Arizona. He's going to be in Athens on that day, and he was very active on social media this weekend, throwing out something of a clarion call about what he'd like to see happen when the 2020 cycle comes to an end. In fact, I think if you're watching on video, we'll be able to show you this. Here is Keely Ringo saying, "Package to UGA." Who is going to come with me on that? Ringo basically saying, I'm going to Georgia, and who wants to join me there for that? Now, listen, package deals is one of those things that if you just do a basic Google search of recruiting writers and the term package deals, around this time of year, months ahead of the end of the cycle, package deals are thrown around a lot. So-and-so are high school teammates, they want to play together. So-and-so were 7-on-7 teammates, they want to play together. So-and-so roomed together at the opening in Frisco, Texas, or years before that in Oregon. Now they want to play together. There's always a lot of chatter about the potential of package deals, and I'm a big believer that for the most part, that by the time it comes down to finally put ink on a sheet of paper, most of these package deals have a way of dissolving. So count me as skeptical to begin with when the notion of package deals getting thrown around on Twitter. But around here, we also are interested in what's interesting, and it's certainly interesting when Ringo says that and when other folks start responding, including a guy like Mikael Sherman, who we have talked about a lot for good reasons. Sherman's a really good linebacker, whether you consider him an inside linebacker or an outside linebacker. He's just a big-time prospect, and he jumps in on the Ringo train here. When Ringo says, I'm a package deal to Georgia, who's coming with me? Mikael Sherman says, hey, every great defensive back needs a great pass rush. And so he gives you a little bit of a shrug of the shoulders. Now, listen, me, like many of you, none of us are going to turn down the opportunity to have Mikael Sherman and Keely Ringo as a part of the 2020 class for Georgia. That'd be a very nice thing to have both those guys in there. However, my antenna really goes up at what I think of sometimes as social media trolling, and I don't mean that negatively towards Sherman or Ringo, either one. I don't think they're intentionally trying to, harm Georgia fans or intentionally trying to, do something bad here on Twitter. But sometimes it's like too much good news on Twitter is almost always, to me, a bad thing. I think sometimes these guys want to keep their ultimate decisions a secret, or in many cases, they just want to keep their thought process along the way a secret. So when they are this out and open of, we're going to be a package deal to Georgia, for me, this is never quite as good as it seems, and many of you might kind of feel the same way on that, although I'd love nothing more than for Ringo and Sherman to eventually be a part of this class. And as Jeff Sintel explained to us on Friday when he joined us here on DawgNation Daily, when it comes to Sherman saying these kinds of things, hey, this isn't the first time he's kind of behaved this way on Twitter, which means that he is coming to Georgia and wants the world to know, or he just wants to have some fun right now on the social media channel. Here is Jeff reminding us of how Sherman has recently done this with another recruit as well. Here's Jeff.
Lots of people notice tweets. Pay attention to deleted tweets, because I think there was some delete Twitter crossfire going back in the deleted Twitter category where Mikael Sherman, his teammate, and Rakeem Jarrett were talking about. Some people think they're a package deal. Some people dismiss the fact that they're a package deal. That's the more accurate statement right there. But there was a tweet he sent out that said, same conference, different divisions. I'm sure that one probably caught your eye because that's speculating that both of them will end up in the Southeastern Conference, but at different divisions of the conference. And, Mikael Sherman is a guy that's trending towards either Georgia or Ohio State in everyone's book. And I would say that the only way those two would both end up in the same conferences would be if a school like LSU or Alabama ends up being the home for Rakeem Jarrett.
So let me see if I can do some backwards working algebra here for a moment and solve for X. When Jeff says he saw on social media Mikael Sherman and Rakeem Jarrett saying they were going to be playing in the same conference but different divisions, the reason why that means that Sherman's coming to an SEC school is because right now Rakeem Jarrett's not really connected to any Big Ten school because for Sherman, it would seem to be, as Jeff said, either Georgia or Ohio State. And so, therefore, Jarrett's not really connected to a Big Ten school. So this must mean that Sherman's coming to Georgia. But it also means that Rakeem Jarrett is not going to Tennessee because that's the same conference but the same division. Are you following all of this? There's a chance that you're not, which is totally understandable. But that's kind of what all of that means, unless it doesn't really mean anything at all. And these guys right now are just having fun on social media. I will say. I do read some of these Ohio State blogs sometimes because, let's face it, there are a few schools who are going to have more overlap than not with Georgia when it comes to recruiting. Ohio State's one. So I do kind of read some of their recruiting content from time to time. Some of their writers do not feel great about Mikael Sherman in that class. So do with that what you will, that maybe some of this chatter involving him in Georgia is more real than not because there's not necessarily this sense of, Mikael Sherman's going to land in this Ohio State class. There's a lot of skepticism coming from that from Columbus, but all of this has kind of a long time to change. One more thing on this same subject. When Ringo throws his thing out there of package deal to Georgia, who's coming with me, another linebacker gets involved on this, and it's another one that around here we really like. That's Justin Flo, who saw Ringo on Twitter and said, hey, let's talk about this. We can have a conversation. We can have some chatter about that. So Justin Flo kind of getting involved with that too. So listen, DawgNation Daily is reporting that Georgia is going to seal the commitments of both Flo, Sherman, and Keely Ringo. We're not really reporting that, but it'd certainly be good news if Georgia did indeed move in that direction. But at least they're talking about Georgia. And listen, there are a lot of programs who can't even generate that kind of chatter over the course of a weekend. Georgia's able to, even if it doesn't necessarily mean the good news a lot of Dog fans want to take. It's at least something, I guess. Now, there was something that, in a roundabout way, I semi-thought was kind of good news this weekend. Now, this goes to show you how low the bar has been set on this. Brian Bresee, the nation's #1 prospect, was at Clemson for its spring game this weekend. In fact, he was recently on Twitter talking with DJ Uiagalelei, the #1 quarterback, who was also going to be there, and they were both excited about taking their Clemson visit. Now, based on some of the stuff that Jeff Sentell has said as of late, and kind of everything else that's gone on here, I've kind of gotten to the point now where just the simple fact that Bresee goes to Clemson for the spring game, the fact that he doesn't commit to Clemson while he's there, I'll take that as good news for right now. I mean, there has been a lot of negative chatter here around DawgNation, whether it be the forum at forum.dawgnation.com, some of the stuff that Jeff has written, talked about on Before the Hedges, here on DawgNation Daily. At this point in time, just the simple fact that Georgia was able to absorb a visit for Bresee to Clemson without the commitment taking place while he's there, I don't know. I guess I'll call that a minor win for UGA, just considering how negative the thing has been with Bresee lately when it comes to his relationship with Georgia. The one thing we do get a sense of, though, here is that Georgia is continuing its strong recruitment of Bresee. In fact, even this weekend, and I consulted with our buddy Connor Riley on this, did he take this the same way that I did? From time to time, I feel like Kirby Smart in the midst of talking about his current team, current practices, from time to time, I think that he kind of throws out a little message that's intended for a recruit that may be watching and listening. I think that's one of the things that Kirby does really well. Well, on Saturday during the scrimmage, we'll hear more from Kirby on the scrimmage coming up in just a couple of moments, but on Saturday during the scrimmage, Kirby was asked about his defensive line. The simple question was, do you have any difference-making defensive linemen? And they went on to say, well, I think that Jordan Davis can be a difference maker because of how big he is. I think that Tyler Clark, when he wants to be, can be a difference maker. And most Georgia fans would agree with both those assessments when it comes to those difference-making defensive linemen, I should say. But then Smart went into greater detail about what Georgia's missing. And gosh, I don't know. Based on some of the scouting reports we've seen a lot lately, it sounds like what Georgia says that it's missing. Boy, doesn't this sound an awful lot like Brian Bresee? Here is Kirby Smart from Saturday.
Are you saying an elite three technique, guy that's quick and twitchy? We don't have that right now. No, we're certainly trying to recruit it. But we got some edge guys, and when you count the defensive line, you sometimes count the defensive ends. I thought Nolan played with a high motor today.
Yeah, it sounds like the reviews from Nolan Smith have been pretty good, but it's the first part of that clip that's most interesting to me. The more we kind of go through this 2020 cycle, the more it sounds like that's where Bresee's ultimately going to play. He's going to line up and be kind of an inside interior defense tackle, like a three-technique guy. But he is quick and he's twitchy. He's the kind of guy that's big but really hard to block because of the athleticism he brings to that position. And Kirby Smart makes no bones about saying, right now we don't have that guy, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, but we are trying to recruit him, and Bresee stays on the open market, at least for now, by not committing to Clemson this weekend. So kind of a lot to process there, a lot of chatter about Georgia from a lot of the recruits that you want to be talking about UGA. Hard to say what it all means right now, but this 2020 class has a lot of really fun personalities, a lot of really intriguing players. Georgia cannot sign a ton of guys this cycle, so you better believe the guys they are prioritizing are all going to be that elite top-shelf quality. Many of them will be in Athens, Virginia on April 20th, and I, for one, cannot wait for that day to get here. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us live on video today, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rev, and we are available as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com or basically any of the other podcast channels. We're just really glad to have you on the program here today. We're going to have a very fun and busy show the rest of the way. Many of you have reached out to me on Twitter to say, BA, can we celebrate what the Diamond Dogs are doing right now? It was a great weekend for UJ athletics in general. The Gym Dogs advanced to the NCAA championships in their regional event at Stegman Coliseum over the weekend. That was great to see. Diamond Dogs, though, did take that series from Vanderbilt. A big deal for Georgia to keep its winning ways alive in the SEC and do something against the Commodores it has not done in a long time. So today, as a part of a celebration of that, we're going to have the guy who called yesterday's game for the SEC Network, our buddy Mike Morgan, back on the program with us today. We'll talk Diamond Dogs with him for a bit. We'll also get some of his thoughts about the rest of the SEC. He's been calling SEC games on TV for a long time, so we'll do some football stuff with Mike, too, in other words. That's coming up a little bit later on today. Before we get to that, though, and before we get to our buddy Chip Towers here in just a moment, let me focus in a bit more on what happened during the scrimmage on Saturday, at least Kirby Smart's account of it. When Smart first took the podium and when he first started going into kind of everything that he saw on the field, it was, as you would expect from a coach, some good, some bad. But there was one line in particular that got a lot of folks' attention. The four-star quarterback on campus now, Dwan Mathis, kind of an interesting prospect trying to work his way up the ladder when it comes to UGA quarterbacks, apparently showed Kirby some things that he liked, and that's one of the things that Kirby mentioned in his initial assessment of the scrimmage from Saturday. Here is Kirby Smart from Saturday afternoon.
Thought we had a good scrimmage. I was pleased with the effort and enthusiasm. As is always the case in scrimmages, one side will shine and then the other side will shine. So I thought defensively we started out really well. The two defense went against the one offense and at least held them to field goals there early, and then the one defense kind of dominated the two offense early. But then we start going ones-on-ones, and we had some really good competition between the defense and offense. I thought that the inconsistencies showed up sometimes in being able to sustain drives offensively and then explosive plays on defense. We gave up a couple explosives, and we don't need to do that to be a good defense. But I thought they executed hard. There were some good licks passed. I thought DeWine did some good things with his feet. He was able to break contain and get out and move around, and he got better today. he's got some improving to do, but he got better today. And overall, I was pleased with the effort of the guys.
So obviously when Smart says something like that about one of his quarterbacks, especially a guy that a lot of folks don't really feel like they know too much of yet because he flipped to Georgia and kind of a surprise on signing day, people are going to lean in and want to hear more about that. And Smart realizes that and says, hey, listen, I know y'all want to know more about D'Wan Mathis, but you got to realize I got to be very careful about what I say because of the tendency of some maybe want to take that and run with it. Here's more of Smart on Mathis.
Well, it's tough because anything I say is going to look like it's a negative for D'Wan. I mean, D'Wan straight out of high school. I mean, I have no expectation that he's going to come in here and conquer the verbiage and the words we have by scrimmage one. So, Stetson even has the advantage of having been in the offense before. So I don't want anything I say. I mean, every quarterback we have has to get better. Every player we have has to get better. D'Wan has a lot of growth because he hasn't been here. He hasn't taken reps or he hasn't done the words. I was very pleased with where he was today. Now, y'all may take that and write that he's ready to start. I'm taking it that he is improved and he has a long way to go, but I'm pleased with where he is right now. And we tried to simplify it for him today so that he could go out there and play football and we could evaluate him at where he is now, not giving him the same menu that Jake's got. That's just not fair.
So I think that's a realistic assessment from Kirby about Mathis. I also think it provides some reason for hope that he might be, having some opportunities to show off what he can do thus far this spring. As far as the more realistic appraisal of kind of where he ranks in the quarterback pecking order of Georgia right now, when Kirby talked about the differential of snaps and how they were divided up between Mathis and the other backup quarterback, Stetson Bennett, I think you get a better sense of where things are at the moment. In fact, here is Kirby talking about what the competition between Bennett and Mathis for that number 2 role looks like right now.
It's competition. I mean, they didn't split the twos 50-50. Stetson got some, a little bit with the ones. He got some with the twos. D'Wan got some with the twos. D'Wan got most of the threes. So they got about the same number of reps, but not the exact same groups.
So I think that's interesting. You hear Kirby Smart say, hey, it was most of the 3 snaps, meaning number 3 quarterback snaps for D'Wan Mathis, some of the number 2s. That leads me to believe even with Mathis doing some good things in the scrimmage on Saturday, looks like right now Bennett seems to have the inside track still on being the number 2 quarterback. But to hear Mathis at least turn some heads briefly during a scrimmage on Saturday, that might be a bit of good news. For more on that and more of what happened this weekend, let's talk to our buddy Chip Towers right now here on DawgNation Daily.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let me bring in Chip Towers here on DawgNation Daily. He was there watching intently, at least the portion we got to see on Saturday of what went on between Sanford Stadium. And then, of course, Kirby Smart gave us more of his thoughts once that was over on Saturday afternoon. And, Chip, let me pick up with you where I was a moment ago discussing D'Wan Mathis. Kirby tossed some compliments his way, but when you kind of drill down on this a little bit deeper, it sounds like Stetson Bennett still taking most of the snaps as number 2 quarterback right now. So I kind of take it as a positive that Mathis did some things well, but to me, it seems like right now Bennett is still the point spread favorite to be this team's number 2 quarterback. Is that kind of where you are on this as well?
Yeah, absolutely, B.A. I mean, I don't know if I were to put odds on it, I might say 100-1 for D'Wan Mathis and 5-1 for Stetson Bennett as far as being the backup. And look, you were there with me, Brandon. I mean, it's not like we can glean a whole lot in the 8 minutes of actual observation that we get to formulate our own opinions. You have to base everything on what Kirby says, reading between the lines. And then your own experience, and so there were 2 things I took away from that. One, I mean, I just don't think it's close that if Jake Fromm were to, for some reason, have to come out of the game for any extended period of time, if Stetson Bennett's going to be the guy that's going to be able to, and you hear me say this with you, I know, Brandon, I've said it before, but, I mean, there's so many people don't make enough of looking to the sideline, getting the signal, interpreting the signal, calling the play, making the adjustments at the line, et cetera, et cetera. Stetson's just going to be better at that because he's a 3rd-year college player who's already been in the system, right? But, the flip side of that that I thought was very interesting is, D'Wan is Kirby's statement that D'Wan's not – he's running something different. I mean, They're putting in what Dwan can do. And I think that's a great thing. I mean, there's a lot of coaches I've talked to in the past that have said, hey, you don't have to know the playbook from front to back to be able to come in and play winning football. And, certainly at 6'6", 205, probably up to 210 pounds at least by now, I would say, based on looking at him just from the sideline, working out and eating the way they do training table and all that. Dwan Mathis is going to bring some things to the table that, frankly, Jake Fromm can't and Stetson Bennett can't. And so you've got to look at that, get a look at it, see what he can do, and that's why I think G-Day will be really fun and exciting to see, because I think they're going to have a Dwan Mathis package. They're going to have a set of plays and things that Dwan Mathis can do, but it's not going to be what Georgia is preparing for the 2019 season, which is an encyclopedia of options for Jake Fromm, which is going to be advantageous for Georgia when it comes to competing for the 2019 championship.
Yeah, I think that's all really well said, Chip. And when you look at Mathis coming in, I mean, he really gives Georgia something it hasn't had since Kirby Smart's been head coach there. In 2016, they had to get Jacob Eason ready quickly because they needed another quarterback for the competition. Even in 2017, Eason was the entrenched starter, but he had played – I guess shakily enough in 2016 that you at least needed Jake Fromm to be there as a potential complement. And in 2018, just by virtue of the fact that Fields was such a big prospect, he was going to generate a lot of attention. In the case of Mathis, they do have the opportunity to bring him along slowly if they want. The fact that the athleticism right now is translating to the college scrimmage game, to me, I'll take that as a good sign, because really Georgia doesn't need Mathis on the field, for a while. Even next year, he could still be learning the throwing mechanics and developing and growing into something. I think it's kind of interesting to think that you might be able to bring Mathis along slowly and add some throwing mechanics and just some, more general, I guess, prowess throwing the football to go along with what already seems to be a pretty prodigious set of, athleticism, tall guy who can run. I think it's kind of interesting to think that Kirby and James Coley can be a little patient with Mathis, because patience hasn't been something that Georgia has had as a luxury with most of the quarterback situations it's had over the last 3 years.
And that's the way the position is set up to be, right? I mean, that's where I think, just the whole Justin Fields, the impatience that's involved in that, I think is problematic, not just for Justin Fields, but I think for football overall. And I think it's going to be advantageous for Dwan Mathis, and I think it's going to be advantageous for Georgia to be able to go, to take some time and to learn things and be able to ease yourself in the process. Because let's be clear, there's two things here, so everybody, Georgia has lacked mobility at the quarterback position. And even with Justin Fields, let's be clear about this, Georgia was not going to turn into a spread quarterback run team. Georgia very adamantly is a pro-style pocket passing system. And that's what they want, and that's what the quarterbacks who come to play here want, including Dwan Mathis and Dwan Mathis' father, who's been terrific in giving us access and talked to Mike Griffith on several fronts. So it's not that you want to all of a sudden become option run and spread option and all that kind of stuff. Georgia loves the pass run option like everything else, but you're still going to be pocket first. And Dwan Mathis' father wants that as well. He wants him to learn how to play in the pocket, because that's how you get the lead, not by running any kind of spread option kind of stuff that so we see in so many other places around the NFL. So, but that said, you can put something in for that, and so I think G-Day will be very should provide a revelation for exactly what Dwan Mathis looks like and what he can do right now. But at the end of the day, you're still going to be a pocket offense, and what Georgia has missed in that Justin Fields brought, and I think Dwan Mathis brings, is just mobility in the pocket. Jake Fromm's working on that. He's slimmed down a little bit, trying to be a little bit more mobile in the pocket when you're trying to pass out of the pocket. Stetson Bennett brings that, though he's smaller, and his windows are going to be a little bit more difficult to find. He can pull the ball down and get upfield or avoid some pressure. Dwan Mathis, no question he can do that. And whether it takes a year, 2 years, what have you, I think eventually Dwan Mathis is going to be quite an asset for Georgia.
So you wrote about the wide receiver situation on Saturday, and I think that's an interesting position group for Georgia, kind of the same way that the other skill positions on offense are, running back and tight end a bit too. All three of those position groups are going to have a lot more guys in the summer than they do right now. You know, tight ends got Wolf coming in, the transfer, Scyther, the recruit, he's coming in, although it's difficult to tell how much he might factor into this. Running back is definitely going to be potentially very different when Zamir White's healthier in the summer than he is right now. And then at wide receiver, which is the group that you focused on, you can make a case, Chip, that there's at least some chance that Georgia's top three receivers for the season may not be on campus yet. Cage with the transfer, the two freshmen, Pickens and Blaylock. There's at least some chance that's Georgia's best trio right there, and they're not even here right now, which leads me to believe that if you're a Brian Herring at running back, a John Fitzpatrick at tight end, you know, a wide receiver of really you can pick anybody you want. Kearis Jackson may be, you know, a good example there. I just think there's an obligation for those guys, at least if they want to be on the field, to make that strong impression right now. I know Kirby, I had a chance to ask him about that. You know, he kind of, you know, validated that a bit too. But for me, that's one of the really interesting storylines this spring. There's certain guys that have, you know, positions in the stage to themselves right now, and heading towards G-Day, I think they need to impress because the competition for a lot of those positions is going to be a lot more stiff come summer, and I'm assuming you agree with that.
Oh, yeah. You know, everything gets kind of scrambled and reshuffled like a deck of cards when the rest of those guys join for the summer, and you go through sort of a regimented you know, workout the entire summer, but especially, you know, come preseason camp, because everybody will be starting with a blank slate again. But again, that's what makes spring practice, and I think the G-Day, ultimately, the G-Day game, intriguing for me, because there's guys that I really want to get a better look at, right? And I know they're getting a look at it in practice every day, but, you know, you mentioned John Fitzpatrick. You know, I've heard great things about him. I did a Next Generation story on him. You know, I've talked to his coach, who I've known for years, you know, going back to, you know, the 70s and 80s at Marist, and you know, he loves John Fitzpatrick as a receiver. He thinks he's a great receiver. And I think, you know, this should be a breakout season for Charlie Warner, who I love both as an athlete, and as kind of a committed individual. I think he knows, you know, that he's going to be the man this year, and he's going to get ready accordingly. But it's all these other guys that we got to find out about. And you know, look, we're halfway through it. We're more than halfway through it. What are we on practice 10 tomorrow?
Yeah.
So, you know, there's only a handful of practices to get ready. What they do between now and that G-Day game, if I'm a wide receiver, I mean, I'm really wanting to impress. This is a pressurized situation for guys like, you know, Kearis Jackson and Demetrius Robertson and Trey Blunt. They're trying to get into that basically 6-7 man rotation that are actually going to play on Saturdays, and a lot of that's going to be determined over the next 2 weeks.
One of the other things I think is interesting is the battle that goes on in a scrimmage like this, and as you said, we don't get to see a ton of this, but we'll get to see it on G-Day, and we'll hear about it, between Georgia's offensive line and Georgia's defensive line. And, Chip, one of the things I think is really interesting here, and I wrote about this myself on Sunday, is how the reputations of these two groups right now could not be more different. The offensive line is filled with potential all-SEC guys, a lot of five-star recruits in there. The defensive line right now is injured, and even by reputation, some of these players just don't quite seem to stack up on paper to what the offensive line is. But I truly believe that battling that group gives the defensive line a real chance to step up and become as important for Georgia what the offensive line has been. And if Georgia's going to be as good on the field this season, a lot of fans want it to be, the defensive line is going to need to improve. How important do you think a battle against what could be the nation's top offensive line helps this defensive line this spring?
You know, I think, B.A., I think the most encouraging thing we heard out of this whole weekend, if you're a Georgia fan, would be what Kirby said about the early portions of that scrimmage on Saturday, where the number 2 defense stoned the number 1 offense running game, and where I think that's encouraging, because that starting line for Georgia is not bad at all. Now, we know Kirby loves to substitute like crazy, and he loves to specialize. He loves to match up. You know, he plays match-up defense. I mean, it's no matter what the situation is, he's running people in and off the field to try to get the best one-on-one matchups across the line. But, you know, in a situation like that, when you're talking about guys like Tyler Clark, Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt, to some extent, Malik Herring. Those are the guys that are able to come out there, and I think they're all SEC caliber. All of those guys, and they're going against an absolute, behemoth of an offensive line. Those guys averaging 330 pounds across the front, 6'5", 6'6". If you're able to stone the run in practice against those guys, you can stone the run, if not dominate the run, against almost any other offensive line in the country. And at the end of the day, those day-to-day matchups in Georgia's practice are going to benefit the defense.
Let me finish up with this. When a player gets in trouble at Georgia, Kirby Smart has made it his habit of saying, this is going to be taken care of internally. And just to be frank, Chip, I think a lot of people have interpreted that to mean internal punishment means no punishment at all. Some people have assumed that that's what a coach might mean when he says this. And yet what we've seen going on with Brenton Cox and Robert Beal as of late, or at least what we've heard going on with these two, I think would confound the expectation that internal punishment means that there's no punishment taking place. These two guys were inside the indoor facility on Thursday while the rest of the team was practicing. On Saturday, there were eyewitness accounts that had them running a lot of stadium steps while the rest of the team was, kind of going through its paces on the field, at least based on some of the whispers and rumors that are coming out of what's happening with both Beal and Cox, who obviously, very famously got in trouble a few days ago for the marijuana thing. Doesn't this kind of recast a little bit about what Kirby means when he says internal punishment, that the operative phrase in that may actually be punishment? Just because it's internal doesn't mean it's invisible?
Yeah, they're getting very up close and personal with Scott Sinclair, which he's a great guy by all accounts, but I don't think you necessarily want to be hanging out with that guy every day to the extent that those guys are. And that's what we're talking about, internal punishment. And look, I wrote it on DawgNation, and I looked it up, and, there's no quibbling. I've even seen some, reaction and commentary to the story that I posted the other day that Georgia's policy has been, quote-unquote, tweaked, since 2017. The policy that I cited in the story that I wrote is from 2018, 2019, and the most realistic, the most similar situation we have is Natrez Patrick, and that occurred under Kirby Smart. And if you remember, Natrez Patrick missed some extended time because of his issues with marijuana. So, I based on what I see, it's black and white. Those guys looking at a 10% suspension would be missing the first game, but that also means it's being dealt with internally, which is internal discipline, which is physical. That's up to the coach's discretion. And there's also, counseling-wise. So they got classes and things that they're going to have to take. Once they resolve all that stuff, then they can move on about it. But I would imagine, in terms of the internal discipline, sooner or later, maybe this spring, we'll see Kirby lift the discipline where they're not working out with the rest of the team and let them be reincorporated into the day-to-day operation. Because, look, here's the bottom line. They need those guys, right?
Yeah.
They need Bill and them to play on the field every day. Hopefully that'll be the case. Bill and Cox will be back with the team before G-Day game, and they'll participate in G-Day. But he hasn't, verbalized exactly how that's going to be handled.
Chip, great stuff. We'll look forward to reading a bunch from you in the days ahead here at DawgNation.com and catching up with you next week on the program, as at that point we'll just be 1 week out from G-Day. So looking forward to that. Thanks for your time. We'll talk to you then.
All right, see you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So I want to respond to what Chip was just talking about there. Let me also correct myself on one thing. A moment ago I said that there's a chance that Pickens and Blaylock and Lawrence Cage, or the incoming transfer from Miami, may be Georgia's top 3 receivers. The way I guess I probably feel more comfortable saying that is they may be 3 of Georgia's top 4 receivers. I don't see any scenario in which the J.J. Holloman, based on what he showed you last year, doesn't have a big junior season for Georgia in 2019. So I'm not going to discount Holloman in that discussion. But as far as the other guys in this roster, their ability to hold off the 2 freshmen and the transfer when he gets here, that to me is not a given for Robertson, for Jackson, for some of the candidates to do that. I think when those summer guys show up, they're going to show up ready to make a name for themselves. Kirby talked about Blaylock again on Saturday because he was asked about it, but he talked about Blaylock again. So, yeah, so I think it really behooves a lot of those guys at tight end, running back, wide receiver. Make a name for yourself right now so that you can have a leg up once some of these new guys get here coming up in the summer, and the summer competition is going to be just as intense. The other thing Chip was talking about there at the end, I said this to him, when we hear that, hey, the punishment's going to be handled internal, discipline's going to be handled internally, I think that especially outside the bubble of DawgNation, I think there can be a sense of, oh, well, this is Kirby just sweeping this under the rug. He's not taking this very seriously. It's internal discipline. Yet when you hear the whispers coming out about Brenton Cox and Robert Beal legitimately going through some pretty strenuous physical work right now, at least that's the chatter that's out there. There were some folks that got a chance to see practice that the media didn't get to see, and we can presume what was going on inside the indoor facility on Thursday. But these guys are doing some real work right now. In fact, Kirby wouldn't even give full lip service to when they might be practicing again. He said on Saturday it depends on how they handle what they're going through right now. So while not everyone necessarily takes the charge that Beal and Cox were levied, not everybody takes that seriously. Apparently Kirby's taking it seriously right now, and as Chip said, Georgia could use what Robert Beal and Brenton Cox can provide, so hopefully they'll be back sooner rather than later. Let me also mention as we do our SEC through that we got our buddy Mike Morgan from the SEC Network coming up in just a moment. Also, many of you getting ready to watch some basketball tonight. That means hosting a party at your house, and if you got plans to do that, you want to score on big savings with fan favorites like what's available at Kroger right now, including meat and cheese party trays, pork back ribs, and bone-in chicken wings. What a great way to get ready to watch a little hoops tonight. For many of you who are planning on doing that, Kroger a great place to go to get set up for all of that. Speaking of hoops, I have to say, there's certain parts of my psyche and my personality that I'm not proud of. This is one of those. I really enjoyed the Auburn fans' disappointment on Saturday after thinking they had won the game, only to find out they had not. I wish I was a better person that said I didn't go back and rewatch those videos over and over again. You can go to DawgNation.com and see them for yourself. The guy in the gym who's pouring the beer over his head, only later get arrested. The folks running out to Toomer's Corner to celebrate with the toilet paper because they didn't realize a foul had been called at the end of the game. Sometimes when you're watching a game at a bar like that, you don't get all the information, and so I have to admit I really enjoyed that. I'm also a big enough man to admit as well that if I was an Auburn fan, I'd have a completely different take on the officiating situation. You've seen the whole actually crew on social media saying, well, actually what happened in the end was supposed to be a foul call. And I guess it was by the letter of the law. I don't know that I want that call called every single time it occurs during a game, because let's face it, the pace of some of these Final Four games, including the game that's going to be played tonight, is plodding enough as it is. I don't know that I need every single whistle blown every single time there's an opportunity to. Now, as far as the double dribble that didn't get called before that, that's an egregious non-call. That's supposed to go down. NCAA won't respond to that because they don't respond to, missed non-calls. But really, it's the missed non-call that hurts you virtually almost more than the actual calls do. So, listen, while I enjoy the misery of Auburn fans, I kind of get why they're miserable, and I guess you can do with that what you will. One more thing I wanted to get to here as a part of our SEC through. I'll invite you to check out Connor Riley's piece at DawgNation.com because I thought he made a great point about a rant from Nick Saban over the weekend. I don't have a ton of time, so I can't get fully into all of this. But Saban basically went off on guys leaving school early when if they'd come back to school, they have a chance to maybe be first-round picks. And he kind of insinuates Ronnie Harrison in this, who ends up being drafted in the third round. And Harrison got mad at Saban on Twitter. You don't see a lot of former Alabama players going at Saban on Twitter, but Harrison kind of did. And I do think this entire ordeal ends up making Saban look kind of bad. I said this during our R.S. Andrews cool down a couple of days ago, that when you look at Georgia's recruiting rivals right now, I think that Clemson's a lot more difficult to negative recruit against than Alabama is. I think that you've got an opportunity to negatively recruit against Saban. I think rants like this give you a chance to do that. I don't think you want to be the coach that tells his players, don't leave early, don't go to the NFL draft. And that's probably not a completely accurate framing of what Nick Saban has said here. But listen, accuracy is not necessarily the number one club in the bag when it comes to negative recruiting. And so I do think some coaches we'll use that against him. We'll see kind of where all that goes from there, and we'll make that your SEC through. Let's turn our attention now to what's happening in Athens, and what a weekend it was for the Diamond Dogs. Beautiful weather in Athens, and another impressive performance. A lot of these in SEC play for UG thus far this season. The guy who had the best seat in the house for this Sunday on the SEC Network is our buddy Mike Morgan. He joins us here on DawgNation Daily. First of all, Mike, thanks for your time here again on the program. We appreciate you being with us.
Absolutely, Brandon. I guess the last time we talked, it was about another sport, but now with basketball coming to a close, and we're still a few months away from football, with all due respect to spring games, it is nice to talk some college baseball.
Well, I think a lot of Georgia fans, too, are really kind of getting acclimated to what's going on here with the Diamond Dogs. Let's face it, for a lot of Georgia fans, because football is so big, baseball doesn't oftentimes, kind of occupy that, top-of-mind space on the shelf of our brains, and yet this team is looking great in SEC play. What it did against LSU, taking the sweep at South Carolina, on the road at Kentucky. And then, I believe, you'll correct me if I'm wrong on this, first time in 11 years to win a series against Vanderbilt. What have you seen from UGA, and what should Georgia fans who haven't plugged into college baseball, what should they know about this team right now?
Well, first off, I understand some of the, let's just say, ambivalence, if not downright apathy, that a lot of Georgia fans had towards baseball over the last, 10 years. I mean, it hit a rut. It hit a really bad spot. And one thing I do know about Georgia fans, much like most SEC fans, they love their college football, and they love the game of baseball. And so when their baseball team wins, they come out in droves. And when Georgia was good, when Georgia was going to the World Series seemingly every other year in the early 2000s, Foley Field was as good of an environment as we had in the league. I mean, they're not going to match the number of fannies in the seats as some other spots, but they would pack it. It would be loud. It'd be a great environment. There'd be tailgating, and Georgia fans appreciate good baseball. I think what's doubly frustrating for the Georgia fan base during that time, this low stretch which began, late Perno years and then early Strickland years, is that you sit there and you say, if we could just get some of the best players from East Cobb alone, we should be one of the best teams in the country. You've got Atlanta, which is chock full of great baseball talent. The state of Georgia as a whole, the bordering states, pluck a guy out of Alabama, pluck a guy out of Florida, and this should be a top 10 program. And so I get it. Like, I've asked myself the same question, why isn't Georgia better? Now, turning it forward, to answer your question, I had them last year in the regional, which unfortunately they lost a really good Duke team in the final game on a Monday, but that was the sign of turning the corner. A national seed last year. I think they're going to be a national seed this year. The talent is there. The coaching staff, I think, is exceptional. They're going to continue to get good players in. This team specifically is a pitching and defense team led by guys like Emerson Hancock, Tony Losey, who you saw yesterday, a talented bullpen with Cole Wilcox, a freshman who throws nearly 100 miles an hour, Zach Christopher. And here's the best thing I would say for Georgia fans. They're not even healthy yet.
Yeah.
You're going to get Ryan Webb back. You're going to get Meadows back. You're going to get Sullivan back. And when this team is healthy, I think they're as good as any team in the SEC. It would not surprise me if they win it.
I was watching the game yesterday, and you made mention of the broadcast of, kind of how Foley Field used to feel. And I got the sense yesterday, I was also in Athens on Saturday for football practice, and so I saw kind of the late stages of that game, from just outside the ballpark. And, seeing it on TV yesterday, it was sold out all weekend. I got the impression that Foley, because so many of these SEC venues, as you know, Mike, are really intense baseball venues, a ton of fun to be at. I got the impression that thus far this season with the LSU series and the Vanderbilt series, Foley Field kind of feels that way again, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does. Again, we've had an arms race in this league, and I'm fortunate that I go to see all 14. Now, there's a couple that still haven't gotten with the times, which I will not mention. But the other 12 are some of the best ballparks in all of college baseball. And like I said, you're not going to be able to compete attendance-wise. You can't fit 7,000 seats at Foley Field. And I'm not sure if 7,000 fans are going to pack it every game. But I do know this, for what you can fit in there, it's a great environment. I love the kudzu corner. I love the fact that it's smack dab in the middle of campus, near everything. It just has a really good feel to it, and those crowds, again, when it's a good team, those crowds are rowdy, they're into the game, they're knowledgeable. It's been one of my favorite places to call a college baseball game for a long time, even before I was with ESPN.
Well, it was fun to hear you on the call yesterday. While we're having the program, I also want to squeeze in just a little bit of football, too, if you don't mind.
Sure.
You obviously you cover this league closely, and I think as we're going through the spring, Georgia got G-Day coming up in a couple of weeks. I think the curiosity is what the rest of the SEC East is going to look like. Florida finished in the top 10 last year. Tennessee has recruited really well, yet Georgia has dominated this division the last 2 years, winning every game in the division by at least 14 points. Do you see the SEC East as closer in 2019 than it's been the last 2 years?
I think the rest of the division is moving up, but I don't think they're there yet. Florida's coming off a 10-win season, and I do believe Dan Mullen was the right guy for that job. I'm still not completely sold on Felipe Franks, but doggone it, if anybody can get blood out of a rock at quarterback, it is Dan Mullen. But the athletes will continue to get there. They had a good recruiting class. They have momentum, which, as you know, is so important when it comes to that. Tennessee, I did a couple of Tennessee games last year. I think Jeremy Pruitt knows the winning formula. He's obviously seen it done with the tutelage that he's received at other places. They still have a ways to go. They lost key players on defense. I think Tennessee is on the rise, but they're not there yet. South Carolina is a tough one for me to figure out. It's a program I know well, covered it for a number of years. Jake Bentley should be in the conversation for a Heisman Trophy if he plays to his level every game. And the problem with him has been consistency. But I think Will Muschamp, in his second go-round in the SEC, is the right guy for the job. So I see that program going up. And then, of course, there's Kentucky, Vanderbilt, Missouri, and I don't put them in the same category. So I think we're getting closer and closer to the big three, if you will, plus South Carolina.
Yeah.
But no one is there yet. No one is where Georgia is. That's a tribute to Kirby Smart, and quite frankly, in part that's a tribute to Mark Richt, because when he handed off the baton, unwillingly, of course, he left that program in pretty good shape. That's more than I can say for the predecessor at Florida, the predecessor at Tennessee, and even Steve Spurrier, the way he walked out at South Carolina. All those were more of a rebuild situation. I thought Georgia was kind of turnkey to be really good right away, and then Kirby Smart just took it an extra level.
One of the things that we've talked about around here is that 2020 in the SEC East, basically another year from now, could be really interesting, because at that point in time, I mentioned South Carolina, like the Brian McClendon transformation of the offense will be kind of, fully in place. Jeremy Pruitt's really recruiting at Tennessee. I think that Tennessee could eventually be kind of a threat to Florida. If you think about Florida as like the second best team in the East right now, by 2020, I'm not so sure that Jeremy Pruitt's recruits haven't had something to kind of say about that at that point in time, and it may be hard, for Florida to match the talent that Tennessee's bringing in. And for Georgia, it's like it almost for sure will have lost its left tackle by then, and could have lost its quarterback if Jake Fromm decides to leave this year. 2019 for me may be more of what the SEC East has been, but 2020, this could be a little bit of a different landscape.
That's an excellent point, and to me, that's when the answer to your original question becomes a lot more clear. What are we looking at in 2020? How much progress will those schools, Florida and Tennessee, and again, I'll continue to keep South Carolina in the discussion, how much progress will they have made under their respective coaches? And, of course, the X factor in all this, look, it's still a quarterback's game. And the trump card that Georgia's had talent for a long time. It's not as if they weren't talented when Mark Richt was there, but the trump card is Jake Fromm. And that's why you're playing for national titles and SEC championships at Georgia, whereas if you didn't have Jake Fromm, let's say, guys I hate to pick on, but if you had Felipe Franks in Athens as your number one, Georgia's not playing in Atlanta. They're just not, and they're not playing for a national championship. But Florida, Tennessee, they haven't had that difference maker at quarterback the way Georgia has. So not only does Georgia have an edge in overall talent, but the most important position on the field by far, they've had the guy with all the intangibles that can make all the plays. I realize he's not a stat stuffer. I don't know if he ever will be in that offense. I don't know if he's going to be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. I don't care. From a college quarterback standpoint, he gives you everything you need to win big games.
Yeah.
And Florida and Tennessee simply have not had that. And again, Jake Bentley at South Carolina has been inconsistent, so I'm not sure if they've had that either. That's been the biggest difference to me. And I'll say one more thing about 2020 and beyond. I can't wait for the Eastern Division to be more relevant. I mean, we have watched the West pretty much be the varsity to the Eastern Division being the JV, with the lone exception of Georgia the last couple of years, and bits, bits and pieces here and there. I know Missouri went to 2 SEC championship games, but those were not great teams. I know Florida went to 2 SEC championship games, but those were not great teams. Everything is cyclical. I remember a time in the 90s when I started covering this league where the big three of the East were far better than anybody in the Western Division.
Yep.
So the West has been so dominant. At some point, the East, I think, will play a little bit of catch-up. And I think we're on our way to doing that with some of the coaches that are in place and some of the momentum those other programs have.
It's a busy time for you this time of year. I know you're in a different university campus virtually every single day. Do you know when you cycle back for UGA baseball again, when you're going to be on the Diamond Dogs again?
Yeah, I've got, a week from tomorrow, Georgia-Clemson, which is a really good out-of-conference match. The thing I love about Georgia, and I talked to Strick about this yesterday before the game, they take on all comers. Yeah. And that out-of-conference schedule is brutal. A lot of coaches would shy away from that. Georgia does not. And Georgia-Clemson, which thankfully we're going to see on the gridiron again, that's just a natural rivalry. So the more they play in any sport, I think it's a good thing. And I'm looking forward to that matchup a week from Tuesday.
Well, it was a great call yesterday on the SEC Network. If you want more of Mike Morgan, find him at Morgan on Air. Anything else you want us to know about what you got going on, Mike?
I'm going to Vanderbilt this weekend for a marquee series, Vanderbilt, Arkansas. I think the SEC in baseball is again, we're looking at a league that's probably going to produce 9 or 10 postseason teams. So for Georgia to even be in the hunt to win the SEC when the league is not down, sometimes we to go back to your football conversation, we talk about a couple of teams that won a divisional title. Well, they did it when the division was down. The SEC has never been stronger, and yet the Georgia baseball program is in great shape. Yeah. We talked about football, and I'll tell you this, to circle back on one other sport, Tom Crean will win in basketball at Georgia. Just give it a couple years, but he will win there. I know the record wasn't great this year, but I think you guys got the right guy for the job.
Well, there's a lot of excitement about the recruiting class that he's bringing in. Anthony Edwards, not the only big name there, so there is definitely some excitement building about Crean. Mike, we just really appreciate your time on the program, and we'll look forward to hopefully getting a chance to catch up with you soon. And thanks for your insight here on the rest of the SEC, including the Diamond Dogs.
Anytime, Brandon. I appreciate it.
Yeah, really good stuff there from Mike Morgan. I like him. He does a good job on the SEC Network, and he brings up a really good point. Now, I won't pretend to be an expert on all 8 guys that Georgia has as its regulars in its lineup, but I have followed this team closely enough to know that they have been really hurt by injuries. The catcher, Mason Meadows, maybe of all those, the one that stands out as most significant to me. And the fact that Georgia's found a way to win these SEC series, including Vanderbilt, which is a big-time program and a program that Georgia has not had success against. Doing this with the injuries they've had, I think, makes it all the more interesting. So that's really good stuff. Do we have our Gatorade updater? Can we roll with that for today? 891 days. That's how long it's been since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs, and we love watching that number go up and up and up, and we think it's going to keep going up for years and years to come. All right, it's a busy week here on DawgNation. A lot of spring practice coverage, visitors list growing for G-Day. We got it all for you. We'll see you back here tomorrow morning as well for DawgNation Daily. And on video. Thanks so much for being with us. It's a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down, heating, air, plumbing, electric. they're the ones that we trust around here at DawgNation to play all the positions for you. So if you need that new AC, if you just need it tuned up to make sure it works the right way, or water heater, kind of anything like that, as I say, that's kind of behind the walls in your house, those major systems, those major, big-time appliances, is appliance the right word? You get the point. Heating, air, plumbing, electric, R.S. Andrews does it all for you, so please find them online at rsandrews.com. It is air conditioning season, and so many of you are going to want to make sure that R.S. Andrews is able to cool down your house, much the same way they cool us down after a hot and busy show. So we appreciate them being a part of this, and find them online at rsandrews.com. Randy Hall says a new name for the birdhouse, maybe the dog pen. That's not a bad idea. Don't forget, for those of you who may have missed of the day, we actually had a really cool piece of insight that we didn't realize, is that Noah Chumley, the preferred walk-on kicker that just signed up for Georgia for the class of 2019, his grandfather was actually the one that made this for us. So that was really kind of a cool thing to be able to learn. Chad Thomas Black says, I don't remember Dan Muffin being so weaselly at Mississippi State. Do you? I think he probably was more weaselly than you might have realized. I think a lot of Ole Miss fans could tell you plenty about that. Alan Verbonchik on the subject of the Diamond Dogs says they continue to win even with a few key injuries. That to me has been as impressive as anything. They've also, the way that college baseball works is you typically start your ace on Fridays, and you hope you have good pitchers to go on Saturday and Sunday, but it's that top of the line number one starter that typically goes on Fridays. And Georgia has lost a couple of the Emerson Hancock starts this year. Lost the LSU game, I think, and lost the Vanderbilt game with Hancock on the mound on Friday night, and yet still found a way to rally back and win the series even after that, which I think is a really good job by Georgia, because Emerson Hancock, I think most of the baseball scouts will tell you this is a future major league pitcher. This is a big-time guy, and yet Georgia not great offensively. Admittedly, I think they would admit they're just not great swinging the bat, so this is a pitching and defense team. So when they get out-pitched, they're going to be in danger of losing, even with Hancock on the mound, and yet to come back the way that Losi did yesterday and give you a big start, I think that's a really good job. So we have some fun with that. And around here, our thing is always going to be this. On any given show, on any given day, we're always going to be 95% football. We are. But we do try to do a good job in a short amount of minutes covering some of the other stuff. So you just got about 3 or 4 minutes worth of baseball there. I'm never going to do 30 minutes on baseball. Never going to do 10 minutes off the top of a show on baseball. But, we're going to try to do a couple of minutes here and there and do it well. It's the same philosophy that we would apply to basketball if the basketball conversation was more relevant. We'll try to do a couple of minutes and try to do it well. We'll have the guy on that called the game on the SEC network, for instance. We're not going to beat you over the head with it. But we are going to try to provide some of it for those of you who want it. And hopefully if it's not your favorite part of the show, if you want football, hopefully it's short enough that it's over before you get a chance to really be too irritated by it. So that's kind of our theory on stuff like that. I thought Mike Morgan was great, though. Kelly Burnett says, I want to see Dan Mullen doing the YMCA with his players. That kind of feels like something you could eventually see Mullen doing. Let me get a few more YouTube comments while I'm over here as well. Dennis Wilson says, Georgia's going to, this is his Miami family, Georgia's going to lose late in the season and leave the back door open for Miami to get into the playoffs after we take care of business in Charlotte. Bring your own guts, I believe. Now, Dennis, isn't bring your own guts that's a Dabo phrase. You can't be stealing from Dabo on that. But Dennis Wilson feeling very good about the start of the Manny Diaz era down there in Coral Gables. Mondiesel 12 says, and this is an interesting comment. He says, BA, people are really overlooking Mr. Tongue. He's talking about Micaiah Tongue, the incoming freshman wide receiver. No one is mentioning him. I think he could be a diamond. He has great film. I don't know what to make of Micaiah Tongue as of yet. I think it's interesting that you bring him up. I know Tongue tweeted this weekend that he's excited about being on campus and being a part of what Georgia's got going on. I'm not quite sure how I see Micaiah Tongue evolving with his role at UGA. I mean, I will admit, and it sounds like you very much disagree with this, I've wondered if eventually Tongue might not become a defensive back at Georgia. I don't think he wants to do that. It sounds like you think he's a very good wide receiver. But I have thought about that for Tongue, but I do think athletically he's a very interesting guy. Eric M. Rio says, BA, which latecomer are you most excited for and why? Well, it's hard not to want to say Dominic Blaylock for that, simply because 2 press conferences in a row, Kirby has talked about Dominic Blaylock. Now, the first time he brought him up on his own. The second time he was asked about Blaylock. But he still talked a lot about him. I don't remember over the last 3 years, going into year 4 now, I don't remember a scenario in which Kirby has talked about the same freshman on 2 different instances before that freshman has gotten on campus. There's no NCAA rule prohibiting him from talking about Blaylock. He's signed on the team. He's, at practice occasionally. But that's just not kind of the thing that I've heard Kirby Smart do before, at least to my memory. For the most part, coaches talk about the players who are playing. If you're injured, it's almost like you just disappear from memory, or if you're not there, it's almost like a lot of coaches just sort of pretend that guy doesn't exist because they're worried about the guys they have right now. So the fact that he has talked about Blaylock a couple times, even though I'm kind of, as many of you are aware, quite enamored with George Pickens, the fact that he's talked about Blaylock a couple times, gosh, y'all, that's hard not to get a little bit intrigued by what might be going on there. Eric, I think that's a really good question, and that is kind of my answer. I'm sorry, I was just looking at comments. I guess I didn't talk for about 15 seconds there. I'm sorry. I was looking at some comments. Trying to find some more YouTube comments to get to. Let me get to some Facebook comments, and I will get some more in a moment. Philip Jordan Wells says, SEC eastbound and down, UGA's are rolling. We're going to do what they say can't be done. Listen, I'll always accept a Smoking the Bandit reference here on DawgNation Daily. Phil Rogers says, BA, how well do we match up with Notre Dame on both offense and defense? My assumption is pretty well. I don't know that this Notre Dame team is going to be as good as one in 2017 was. Now, quarterback that may be better. Offensive line probably not quite as good. If you look at the Bet Online early look-ahead line for that Georgia-Notre Dame game, and later on in the summer we'll get some more of these. The Golden Nugget's always my favorite. The ones that South Point have gotten really good, too, over the last couple of years. South Point in Las Vegas, for those of you who care, is trying to be the college football sports book. That's kind of the claim to fame they're having. And so they're going to probably try to jump ahead of the Golden Nugget in terms of releasing some of these early point spreads. Online, the South Point has already Bet Online has already given you a couple. And according to Bet Online, Georgia's an 11.5 point favorite over Notre Dame, I believe. So you can do with that what you will. Drew Roman says, BA, can UGA basketball be what Auburn was this year? And my honest answer is I don't believe so. I think what you see with this Auburn team is I do think you see the example to which experience can matter in college basketball. Remember, I don't believe we had, and Connor Riley may correct me on this, I don't think we had a freshman in the Final Four average more than 6 points a game during the season. Any freshman in the Final Four averaging more than 6 points a game for the season?
Being a Virginia aficionado, Kihei Clark for Virginia played sort of a key role. He was the one who made the pass to Diakite to tie the game against Purdue. Aaron Henry played a key role for Michigan State this year. He, however, is more famously known as the guy Tom Izzo yelled at and got in his face with. So there are freshmen playing key roles, but unlike, the Dukes, the Kentuckys, the one and dones that, the college basketball media is so enamored with writing about, those guys we're not in this fight.
Yeah, so and now that just it doesn't mean freshmen are bad. It just means that experience in college basketball does matter more than some people think it does, because I don't think that Zion and R.J. Barrett lost because they were freshmen, but they eventually did lose. The same way with Kentucky. Kentucky's super talented as every year. I don't believe that Kentucky lost because Ashton Hagans was a freshman, but they eventually did lose. As much as I hate to say this, Dan Wolken actually had a pretty good column about this at USA Today the other day, that complementary pieces are a really important part of national championship puzzles. And I do think that Auburn seemingly did a pretty good job of putting complementary pieces together around its team. And I'll admit I don't know. Like, was Bryce Brown a 5-star recruit,
No,
a
he
high
was a
recruit?
3-star recruit from Georgia.
I was kind of under the impression that was true, that some of what Bruce Pearl has won with are not necessarily 4- and 5-star recruits, which doesn't mean that you don't want them. But I do think there's something to be said for Auburn building up to the point where it is now. And that's one of the reasons why I think that Anthony Edwards' presence at Georgia and some of these other, top 100 signees that they're going to have for this year's class, I think they may do more to lay a foundation for future success at Georgia than they're actually going to enjoy themselves. I mean, remember, I've mentioned this before, the number one basketball statistician is a guy named Ken Pomeroy. He does not put a lot of weight on the value of freshmen, even though freshmen are the majority of players that we talk about in a given season, at least they have been the last couple of years. When he's doing his projections, he doesn't really factor freshmen into those projections. So I do think that to the tune of getting to the Final Four, I think experience matters. It's one of the reasons why I wondered aloud, does Georgia have enough roster room? And the honest truth is I have no idea. They have enough roster room to bring in a graduate transfer of some kind. Can they bring in somebody that's played? Now, basketball seems to be a sport where playing together also matters. It's not just experience on the floor. It's experience with your current teammates, it seems to matter, both at the college and the NBA level. But if you told me Georgia's going to have a dominant freshman in Edwards, a couple of other guys that are really good and really talented, and then you can start sort of peppering some experience around them, at that point in time, you kind of get to an interesting team. But if your team is predominantly made up of freshmen, I mean, if the lion's share of your points and rebounds and assists are coming from freshmen, that's not the kind of team that I could see making a deep run in the NCAA tournament, nor is that a team that I think is going to have an easy time of actually even making the tournament, given how competitive the SEC's become.
Well, but to pump the brakes on what you're saying, Georgia does have that coming back next year. Jordan Harris was a really good player at the end of this year and looked like an emerging guard once he sort of figured out how to play in Tom Crean's system. The same can be said for Tyree Crump. Both of those guys coming back will be seniors next year. You have Nicholas Claxton coming back as a junior.
Is Claxton definitely coming back?
He hasn't announced he's not.
I'm not arguing one way or another.
He's been working with the team. He has not made an announcement on if he is going pro or not yet. Rayshawn Hammond's presumed to be coming back as well. Those are 4 building block pieces that all have plenty of experience.
So maybe Connor's right. Maybe there is on the current roster enough experience to add to the young talent that's there. I mean, I will admit that part of my belief of the current roster is colored by what I thought Tom Crean's belief was about that roster at times during the year. But one way or another, I do think that the perfect recipe for success in the NCAA tournament is dynamic young players, because that's the only time you have dynamic players is when they're young. Dynamic young players along with experienced guys that can, just do some of the dirty work required to win at the highest level. Let me get another football comment.
Before we get to that, I just want to say Tom Crean does play a role in tonight's title game.
Is that right?
Kyle Guy was the number 37 overall recruit in the 2016 recruiting class. Top 40 player, number 1 player in the state of Indiana. Guy's grandparents were season ticket holders for Indiana basketball. I believe I read his great-grandfather was on the board of trustees of the University of Indiana. That's a kid that needed to go to Indiana, that theoretically should have gone to Indiana, but for whatever reason, Guy and Crean did not get along in the recruitment process. Guy ends up going to, or gel, not get along, not that they didn't like each other. They just didn't gel the same way Guy did with Tony Bennett.
Yeah.
Cut to Saturday, Guy hits, people can make what they want about the officiating. It was absolutely a foul. I have eyes. We all saw he came down, he hit him in the leg, came down, couldn't land. It's a correct call. Double dribble. If it was so obvious, how come nobody realized it in real time? And, refs miss things all the time. The refs missed Bryce Brown grabbing Jerome's jersey right before, the double dribble happened. So, it happens. This stuff evens out over the course of time. Back to my original point, Guy hits probably 3 of the most clutch free throws you ever see. Not just an NBA player, but a college player hit, let alone. And he's at Virginia because, in part, he chose not to go play for Tom Crean at Indiana.
That's very interesting. Very interesting, and obviously the Cavs are glad to have him. Felton Johnson in the Facebook comment section mentioned Walter Grant if the switch to running back was permanent. He was, I guess, still there again this weekend after remaining there on Thursday as well. I think what you have going on here is, if you'll remember when Robert Edwards was with us on Thursday, he mentioned how banged up the running back room is right now. Apparently, James Cook was, getting, 9 or 10 carries or so. I believe it was the phrase that Kirby Smart used. But Kirby told us last week he's not 100%. It sounds like what happened with DeAndre Swift that Edwards told us about is indeed true. Edwards mentioned he had I think called it a tender ankle. It sounds like, based on some of the chatter from the scrimmage on Saturday, that Swift was somewhat lightly used during that scrimmage. That the overall, running game situation, some of those guys were not getting a ton of work overall. So all of a sudden, Walter Grant playing at running back during practice does start to make more sense. That to be able to give the defense a chance to battle against running backs, they just need more bodies over there, because obviously we know what Zamir White's going through right now. So I don't believe this is a permanent deal for Grant. At least that's my assumption. But it sounds like right now Georgia's just needing a running back during practice. And Robert Edwards kind of went into some details with that on Thursday, and there was really nothing from the scrimmage that would conflict with what Edwards told us. So there is that. Alex Dean also asked about what positions are injured on defense. Right now you got 3 defensive linemen who are in various states of limited involvement. Julian Rochester was at practice on Saturday, but he's not really thought to be practicing. Mikael Carter's limited. David Marshall is still limited, although I guess all 3 of these guys were maybe at least doing a little something on Saturday. But they're all 3 thought to be pretty limited. But that's a good bit of injured guys for your defensive line right now. Doug Rayburn says, why not try Nate McBride at running back? Listen, McBride was a fast dude. I'd actually kind of enjoy that if it's G-Day. They gave McBride a couple carries. And we just rode that for a month and talked about nothing but that every single day for the next month. I think that'd be kind of fun. Rick Martin says a lot of Georgia players at Auburn because Fox refused to go the AAU route. Here's the one thing I'll never completely understand. Did Fox not want to go AAU, or was Fox told not to go AAU? Because, the situation with Dennis Felton, I think, was fairly similar, right? And I don't know if in the aftermath of Jim Herrick, Georgia was just told it needs to be very careful with recruiting, or if that was just a choice that those guys themselves wanted to make. I honestly don't know the answer to that. But pretty clearly, because Pearl was eager and big on recruiting Atlanta back when he was at Tennessee. So even though he's geographically a little closer to Atlanta now at Auburn than he was in Knoxville, the Atlanta area was a big deal for him even back when he was at Tennessee. So clearly he's wanted to be involved in this. And now, either by his own personal choice or by having the green light, Tom Crean seems to be more involved in the AAU circuit in Atlanta than previous Georgia coaches were. But listen, I won't pretend to know who it was that threw up the stop sign there. Was this Georgia coaches saying, ooh, this is not something I want to be a part of? Or was this some unseen force above them saying, hey, don't go get mixed up in something that might be, kind of a nasty situation? Because, let's face it, the college basketball recruiting is quite a scene right now. You had Avenatti coming out with even more allegations this weekend, I guess, involving this time Zion Williamson at Duke. I don't really care one way or another, but certainly college basketball recruiting, I'll just say it this way, it's a little tricky. College basketball recruiting apparently is a little tricky.
Just to give a nugget here, the 3 best players on Auburn's team this year, Jared Harper, Bryce Brown, and Chumu Okeke, who did not play in the Elite Eight or Final Four game because of injury. This is where they went to high school. Pebblebrook, Atlanta area. Yeah. Tucker, Atlanta area. Westlake, Atlanta area.
Yeah, that's tough. That's really, really tough for a lot of Georgia fans. There are Georgia fans who care about Georgia basketball as much as they care about football. There's not as many of them, obviously, but there are some. To see that many, Atlanta area guys, Georgia area guys, being major contributors for Auburn's Final Four run, for a lot of Georgia fans, that is a painful thing. Will Marlowe says, how about them Diamond Dogs? Will, hope you enjoyed Mike Morgan a little earlier talking about the Diamond Dogs series win against Vanderbilt, which I thought was really entertaining baseball. I watched a lot of that yesterday. Really good stuff for the Diamond Dogs. Thought it was a good game. Dean Butler says that's exactly why college basketball is not my favorite sport. The refs can change the game with calls or missing calls. I'm a Tom Crean dog roundball fan, but the refs ruin it for me. Dean, I actually thought about that this weekend. I do believe, now I'm a big basketball fan, so this doesn't turn me off from the sport. I believe that basketball is the sport most influenced by officiating. And I do think that prevents basketball from being as enjoyable as it could be. I think the sport is really, really heavily influenced by officiating because, in NCAA tournament games, you see all ends of the spectrum on this. You see how tightly games can be called sometimes, and that affects the flow. But you also see when games are not called tightly, basketball can get really, really physical. I mean, Virginia and Texas Tech tonight will be very willing to be very physical if the officials let it go, and that impacts the flow. So it's not just calls being made that impacts the flow. It's non-calls that can also potentially impact the flow as well. I mean, even in baseball where the umpire, especially home plate umpire, has so much power, I still think the basketball officials have the most control over sport. Now, obviously, we saw some high-profile misses in recent NFL games where it seems like the officiating is a really big deal there. But listen, football is still a brute, collision, physical sport. I think, just given the physical advantage, especially in college football, that one team can have over another, I don't think the officials can do that much to alter the outcome of a game there. But in basketball, when so much of what goes on there is judgment, it's either ticky-tack or, it's an egregious non-call, depending on the perspective of the person who's viewing it. I do think that one of the things that hurts basketball sometimes is the heavy, heavy impact the officiating can have on it. For instance, watch the online chatter during the typical NBA playoff game, how much of that conversation ends up being about the officiating. Dean Butler, also on the subject, McBride says, he needs to play somewhere. It would be a shame if his college career gets gone and he didn't get a chance to play that much. So, Dean, I'm going to reboot something I've said now a couple times about a lot of these, and it ends up being mostly 2017 signees that we say this about. I think when you look at a guy who has not played, and McBride's an example of that as a popular linebacker, Notori Johnson is an example of this as a very popular player from that 2017 class, moving from offensive line to defensive line. I think there's a tendency to assume that something is going wrong when these guys are on the field. I mean, even a guy that I like Trey Blunt, is an example of this. Blunt played a good bit in 2017, didn't play as much last year. What's going on? Why is this guy not playing? Is he a bust, or is Georgia, improperly using his skill set? I think that we're an example now where this Georgia roster is so deep and so talented by anybody's estimation that not playing is not necessarily an example of, well, this guy's just not panning out as a player. He's just not any good, or Georgia's not using him properly. You can't use everybody equally. You do have to have a pecking order. You have to have a hierarchy in place. And there are going to be some guys, unfortunately, at the bottom of that hierarchy. Now, the cool thing is that over the course of a 4-year career, you're going to have some movement with that. It's not a static situation. Running back's a perfect example of that, where, hey, it may be one guy's turn to get some shine at one point, and it may be, somebody else who earns that opportunity over the course of a 4-year career. So I agree with you that, listen, when these guys come in, I hope they all get their chance to show what they're about. I hope they all get a chance to be on the field and play. But right now, for the ones that haven't had that happen yet, I think it's easy to look above them on the depth chart and say, oh, it's because of this guy, and this guy. But listen, football's a sport of attrition. Injuries occur. Guys that seem like can't miss prospects, some of them won't fully pan out. And who's to say by the time that, the 4-year career of a player's done, who's to say that he won't eventually get that chance and an opportunity to be on the field and doing something for a UGA. I'm not giving up on any of these guys yet, and I think for a lot of these guys, and as I said before, it ends up being the 2017 guys, you say this about the most, I think they ought to be commended for their willingness to fight and compete when competition right now is as stiff as it's ever been at Georgia.
I have a question for you, BA.
By all means.
All right. And for those watching on video, I think you'll like this. So at the top of the show, we had screen grabs from 4 different 5-star players.
Yes.
Who were tweeting about Georgia, or in one player's case, Clemson this weekend. You had 5-star cornerback Keely Ringo.
Ooh.
5-star outside linebacker Mikhail Sherman.
Ooh.
5-star I guess he's an inside linebacker. He'll probably play off-ball linebacker, Justin Flo. And 5-star defensive tackle, Brian Bresee.
Yeah.
Now, all of those players are the number 1 rated player at their position. How many of those players do you think Georgia lands? I'm putting your feet to the fire on this one.
Is it a cop-out if I say 2 of the 4?
I think 2 out of the 4 is my answer.
Is that good enough?
I certainly think so. To get, potentially the number 1 corner, the number 1 linebacker at either position, theoretically number 1 defensive tackle, I think that's a big, big win.
I'm tempted to want to say that 2 of 4 is only good enough if one of those 2 is Brian Bresee.
So you'd rather okay, can I let me give you, would you rather have Ringo, Flo, and Sherman, but you don't get Bresee, or you get Bresee and your pick of one or the other 2?
Oh, it's not even close. It's not even close. Give me I'd think listen, I'd think about Bresee plus nobody. I think if you gave me the choice of all 3 or Bresee, I think I might consider taking just Bresee if that's the choice.
I am shocked.
If you give me Bresee plus one of those guys and I get to pick which one, it's not even close.
Wow.
What the right answer is.
So my natural follow-up is, of the recruits that you've wanted Georgia to land in your time hosting DawgNation Daily, essentially the entire Kirby Smart era, where does Bresee rank among all-time most want? Where does Bresee rank on the all-time I need Georgia to land them?
Okay, so let me bring in a comment on this, too, because Colby Curry says BA gets stuck on his guys, man. LOL, at least he's consistent. So here's the thing, is like this feeling about Bresee for me is actually a fairly new thing. I took what Kirby Smart said on Saturday very seriously. I don't know how easily it is we could fire that audio up and play it again. We may not be able to. When Kirby Smart says, when it comes to that,
we can.
Okay, here's Kirby Smart, I think, referencing Brian Bresee. I take this really seriously. Here's Kirby again.
Are you saying an elite 3 technique, guy that's quick and twitchy? We don't have that right now. No, we're certainly trying to recruit it. But we got some edge guys, and when you count the defensive line, you sometimes count the defensive ends. I thought Nolan played with a high motor today.
So when he says we don't have that quick, twitchy 3 technique, which, all indications are that's what Bresee's heading for in his college career. Not really a defensive end anymore, kind of moving in and being kind of like that interior 3 technique defensive tackle. I think those guys are really hard to get, probably. I mean, I'd be curious to know, okay, who was like 4 or 5 examples of that in the SEC recently where like, hey, this is that kind of like really quick, hard to block, defensive lineman. For Kirby to say we don't have that guy right now, I think makes Bresee all the more valuable. Now, my next choice on that list, it might be Ringo. It might, but just because while defensive back is getting to be a pretty crowded group, it's probably not as crowded as either the linebacker spots are right now. So my number 2 choice from that foursome that we talked about at the top of the show might be Ringo. But they just don't seem to make a lot of what Brian Bresee seems to be. So therefore, as it stands right now, he's a guy that I really want. And, I mean, I'll be the first to tell you, the fact that he's also getting to be a little bit of a hard player to get, the fact that he might be on his way, to Clemson, at least based on some of the internet chatter. I mean, I won't pretend that doesn't make me a little bit more affectionate towards him, just because, the one that gets away is always going to get your eye a little bit more. But hearing Kirby Smart say, we need this specific type of skill set, we don't have this on our roster, knowing that Brian Bresee does that and he's the nation's number 1 prospect, I just take that really seriously. Mm-hmm. I take it really seriously.
So if I had to rank the top gotta-have player, I'm guessing from each class. So this class, 2020 class, it's clearly Brian Bresee.
No, I'm going to go. The thing I want out of this class more than anything else is 2 5-star running backs.
Okay.
And the next thing I think I want is probably Brian Bresee.
Can I recount the number 1 player? If you have to get one player,
I think it's Kendall.
Wow.
I think it's Kendall Milton. I like Kendall Milton a lot. I do.
You really, Kendall and Brian are really going for your eye.
I I have been over the moon about Kendall Milton since that one interview that Jeff did with him where he talked and he sounds like he's like an 8-year NFL veteran. Like he sounds really mature. I think his dad comes across as a real seasoned, savvy, dad.
Thoughtful.
Pardon me?
Thoughtful.
Yeah. This family seems like they're going through this process in exactly the right way, which makes me think that there's a little bit of cachet if they were to choose Georgia. It makes Georgia seem good by proxy, just given the fact that they put a lot of effort into making the right choice. If their choice is Georgia, I think it validates Georgia. Plus, I think that you've got to maintain your strength. I think that every program's going to have a little bit of a weakness, and you don't want it to be defensive line, but every program's got something they're trying to work around. So for Georgia, I can handle defensive line not being perfect, but if you're Georgia, given the way that your roster's been built, you can't go into next year not having an army of potential 1,400-yard running backs. Not that they're all going to get 1,300 or 1,400 yards, but you need at least 3 candidates to get 1,300 yards for you next year. I'm going to include a healthy Zamir White into that discussion, and I'd like to have 2 freshmen that could potentially fit that bill as well.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. I understand.
Yeah.
I'll come back to 2019 because I know the answer, and we'll quickly go over that. If I had to go 2018, because I was not with DawgNation Daily yet, but I've always sort of followed Georgia recruiting pretty closely. I think the guy, BA, for a long time was pounding the table about saying Georgia needs to land this guy. Jeff, what's going on with Tyson Campbell?
No, I was big on Campbell. I was big.
Still are, by the way.
Yes, yeah, I'm not selling into my Tyson Campbell stock, but Campbell was a big one for me because that was a clear example at the time of what Georgia did not have. Georgia did not have that big, athletic cornerback to put opposite of DeAndre Baker. They did have him last year. Didn't always work out the way that I thought it would. But nonetheless, Campbell was a big one for me. The other big one for me in 2018 was, just because of who Georgia beat out to get him, was Brenton Cox, getting him from Ohio State.
Getting him to flip.
All the things that he'd said about Ohio State, very complimentary of Larry Johnson, very complimentary of that program's ability to get players in the NFL, even though he's from Stockbridge, and you think, well, Georgia ought to have the inside track on a Stockbridge guy. Beating Ohio State for Brenton Cox is a really big deal for me for the 2018 class.
2019, there were 2 guys. One Georgia got, one Georgia famously had, and then did not get. We'll go with the Kobe Dean. You pivoted pretty quickly. I wasn't quite here yet when the Owen Popo stuff went down, but I can imagine you were very pounding the table about Popo. And then when Dean was an option, you were very steadfast, and have stayed steadfast in saying this is a guy Georgia needs to land because he's a difference maker.
Yeah.
The other one, we don't have to talk about him if you don't want to. It was Jaden Hazelwood.
Yeah, Dogfather says that's the all-timer. He says Bresee's only number 2 to the all-timer, which was Jaden Hazelwood. And yeah, listen, I mean, I kind of stand by my guns on Hazelwood. Now, I'm really happy with George Pickens. I think that Georgia did a great job of replacing what was a miss. But, one of the things that sometimes people get upset with me about is, I mean, as well as Georgia recruits, they are going to take the occasional L. And they took the L in Hazelwood. I mean, it's just a flat-out it's an L. And I think it's going to work out fine for Georgia. And frankly, I'm not so sure it's going to work out quite as well for Hazelwood. Georgia may catch him on the rebound. But it was an L at the it was an L at the time, for sure.
Grundy on YouTube says, I don't think UGA will be in the top 3 in recruiting in 2020 or 2021. Not enough elite UGA recruits.
So
$100 that UGA has a top 3 class in either 2020 or 2021. I will take that bet every single day of the week.
I love that Connor has now made a $100 bet.
It's the only reason I have this in my. It's to just let people know I am serious about anything and everything.
Yeah, I mean the one thing that I kind of want to push back on from Wednesdays before the hedges with Jeff. Jeff was saying, hey, recruiting is getting tougher now because Georgia doesn't have early playing time to sell the way that Tennessee can sell that to a guy like Raheem Jarrett, or the way that, some other program can be able to do that. My point is, I don't care. I got to have you get a top 3 class anyway. Now, I like getting number 1 classes because I just think it's fun to be number 1. Ultimately, as long as it's, like this year, Georgia, if they only sign, 21 guys, how many they're going to sign this year, 21?
21.
I mean,
maybe it goes up if Georgia plays well this season and a few more guys declare for the draft, which I could certainly see happening.
I think that if you only sign 21 guys, it's going to be really hard to have a top 3 class.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be really hard to have a top 3 class if you only sign 21 guys because of just the way that the math is tabulated. So we will judge this class a little bit differently. It'll be average recruit. But if 2021, if Georgia's kind of fallen off its perch of top 3 classes because all of a sudden now Clemson's still getting its share, Tennessee's getting its share, Alabama hasn't slowed down, then this Georgia machine that we all think is being built, it will have slowed down. In 2022 on the field or 2021 on the field, if Georgia doesn't maintain this pace of 300-plus point classes on 24/7 Sports, by 2021, Georgia will not be competing on the field as effectively and as dominantly as people want. I mean, unfortunately, we're in an era right now where resources are so marshaled by just a small number of teams that you've got to keep doing top 3 level classes, 300-point plus classes, average recruit of a pretty high 4-star. That's got to be your average recruit, and you got to have 18 or 19 of those guys. If you're not doing that, you're not really keeping pace with the 2 or 3 best programs in the country.
So the 300 points threshold is what you probably need to have a top 3 class. It's not unprecedented to break the 300 threshold with a smaller number of recruits. In 2017, Ohio State had 21 commitments, 5 5-stars, 14 4-stars, and 2 3-stars. Finished second place that year with 312 points. It's a good chance Georgia's recruiting class this year, just given what we've heard from Jeff and where they currently stand with a lot of players, that I actually think that breakdown of 5 5-stars, 14 4-stars, and 2 3-stars, I think there's a chance that looks a little similar to what that 2017 Ohio State class looked like.
Yeah, I think that's probably I think that's probably fair.
Now, granted, that's also probably best case scenario.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. Neil Adams says if we win a national championship, recruiting won't miss a beat. And I think that Neil is right about that, but I think it also speaks to the opposite side of that same coin, that if Georgia doesn't get over the hump, programs are going to use that against them because right now Clemson and Alabama can sell that. And assuming, another team joins that club soon, they'll be able to sell that as well. So at a certain point in time, I guess recruits are going to kind of want to see Georgia get over that final hump and win that game. But the fact that Georgia has been as close as it has been the last couple of years, I continue to believe is an argument for Georgia more so than an argument against Georgia because, let's face it, Kirby Smart's just now going into his 4th year as a head coach. I mean, they are, even if Kirby won't admit this, slightly ahead of schedule with the success they've enjoyed. But when you are primarily battling Clemson and Alabama, I mean, they will point to those championship rings, and Georgia really needs one of those to fully validate that. That's why I think if Georgia wins 1, it'll win 4. I mean, I just think that once you
the first one's the hardest.
Yeah, it seemed like my first million was the hardest. I mean, after that, they've gotten way easier. I think once you kick in that door, things get easier. But as long as you don't have that, programs will use it against you. Just like we said during the regular broadcast. You better believe that a lot of programs are going to say, ooh, Nick Saban, he's going to tell you can't leave school after your junior year. He's going to try to hold you prisoner on campus because he doesn't want you to go to the NFL draft because that hurts his roster. That may not be completely true, but people are going to use it. The same way people are going to say about Kirby Smart, oh, he can't win the big games. Oh, he can't do this. He can't do that. That's not true. We've got plenty of examples of Kirby having won big games as Georgia coach, but until he's got the championship ring, good old boy Dabo Swinney and Nick Saban, they're going to hammer Kirby Smart over the head with that behind the scenes, and I'm guessing some of that's what's gone on with some of these names we talk about a good bit. Anything else we want to do before we get out of here? Any other comments?
No, I think it was a very strong Monday show this week.
I think it was fun. It seems like the brief baseball talk was well received, at least the best I can tell. People kind of handled that okay, which is
top
good.
3 consensus team now. Number 3 in Baseball America, number 2 in D1 baseball.
Plus, for those of you that maybe don't follow baseball that closely, nobody likes Vanderbilt. So Vanderbilt's kind of had a little bit of a reputation for being a little bit of a cocky team. So beating Vanderbilt's actually pretty fun. So it's one of the if you're going to get involved in baseball, that's one of the first things you have to wrap your mind around is that Vanderbilt is almost the exact opposite in baseball of what they are in every other sport. Like they're kind of a power in baseball. They're probably the best recruiting program in the entire SEC, I'm thinking.
Definitely. I think they've had like an unprecedented run of top 25 classes.
So beating Vandy for Georgia was a pretty big deal. Van Bird says, I think the transfer portal will become just as important as recruiting in the near future. Yeah, I think Van's right about this. And I think one of the things you're going to see starting this spring is we have mostly covered this up to this point about how the transfer portal works against coaches and works against programs. I think starting this spring, we're going to see coaches and programs go on the offensive a little bit more. It's not going to be so much the defensive of let me keep my players out of the portal. It's going to be let me go shopping to see who is in the portal. Because, Kirby Smart did say a couple of days ago that they are very well aware of every player that's in there, very well aware of, various positions and stuff like that. So this is another thing that's going to, I think, what's the word I'm looking for here? Favorability. I think right now the transfer portal, its favorability is pretty high because I think that the rank and file public thinks it benefits players, so therefore they kind of like it. I think we may see the favorability ratings for the transfer portal go down, come spring and summer when all of a sudden, the big-time coaches use that as a Amazon.com and they go shopping in there and they start trying
to get the Amazon Prime. They get it in 2 days.
Yeah, they get an inside linebacker in 2 days, yeah. I think we're going to see coaches get aggressive in how they use the transfer portal. It won't be used against them by their own players. They're going to try to use it to their advantage.
I would say sort of an example similar to the transfer portal is this, like the whole NBA players power or player empowerment, wanted to get traded to a place they want to go to for a long time. People were very in favor of that. And I think this year with the Anthony Davis and Jimmy Butler situations, you sort of saw the general public sort of start to turn against that. I think you could see that in a lot quicker succession at the college level with the transfer portal.
All right, let's finish with this comment. Mike Mazzell says that Georgia will average 48.7 points a game. Do you go
47?
He says 48.7. 48.7 points a game. I don't think that's an impossibility. That's not what I would set the over-under at average points per game. I don't think it's an impossibility that Georgia averages 48.7 points a game this year. Pull up the schedule, Connor. And we'll finish up with this because it's 11:45.
Just for clarification's sake, there was one team in the country last year that averaged more than 48 points a game. It was Oklahoma at 48.4.
But Alabama had to have been close.
Alabama was at 45.6.
Yeah. So even with the extra, Power 5 game this year against Notre Dame, I think Georgia could average 48.7. Because remember, as much hand-wringing as we do over the Georgia offense, by every one of those advanced metrics, FPI, Football Outsiders, Football Study Hall, Georgia was like one of the top 3 or 4 offense in the country in every single one of those metrics. Georgia was successfully offensively a year ago, scoring a lot of points on the road at Kentucky, a very good defense, for instance. So for the people who think that the Georgia offense is kind of stale and boring and needs to do more, statistically, offensively, it was doing a really good job. Now, it could have used a few of those points at LSU. I won't deny that. 48.7 may be a little extra, but let's face it. It's not interesting to say 41.2. So I appreciate Mike putting a little extra juice in this and saying 48.7. You know what? I'm going to join Mike in there. I'm going to say that Georgia averages at least 48 points a game. I like that, Mike.
That's a 40. I could absolutely see 40. I think they're going to average at least 40. 48. But they're rich for my blood.
But there's a big difference between 40 and 48. Georgia could average 40 and go 10.
It's a whole touchdown.
Yeah, Georgia could average 40 and go 10-2.
Mm-hmm. They did in Mike Bubbles last year, 2014.
Yeah.
Averaged 40 points a game, went 10-3.
How many points do you think? If you're going to give me, I've already said before I want the undefeated season. So if you're going to give me a 12-0 regular season, you're going to have to average more than 40, I think. You're going to have to average
40. I think 41, 42 is where they're going to settle in at.
Gerald Herman says, y'all talking about football or basketball?
Clemson, for reference, last year averaged 44 points a game.
Yeah, I got to have – you said Alabama was running around 45.
Alabama was at 45.
I got to have that 44-45. But with Rodrigo Blankenship, give me the extra field goal to get me to 48.
See, I actually do think that's part – or at least under Kirby Smart or Chaney, it's uncertain who was making the calls there. I think they were a little too reliant to – go after field goals. I give Edward Orgeron a ton of credit in that LSU game. I don't know if he said it in the press conference, but I have no doubt he told his team, we're not winning this game by kicking.
Yeah.
We're going to go for it on fourth down and short every time, and they got it just about every time. So, I do think a little more aggressiveness, turn those threes into sevens. That's maybe how you get to that 44, 45, in your mind, 48-point threshold to where, Georgia's the top offense in the country.
I said the last comment, but now people are firing in their own opinions here. Let me get John Anthony to finish up on the other side of the ball. He says, will we be a top 10 defense, yes or no, BA? Let's use advanced metrics for this. Let's say defensive efficiency type stuff. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say that Georgia will be. As much as, I wrote about this on Sunday, there's some concerns with the Georgia defensive line right now. As much as I have some of those reservations, it's not enough for me to say it's not enough for me to be worried about the Georgia defense overall. I think it's a top 10 defense. And you know what? I don't see a lot of people throwing brakes on this hype train for Nolan Smith right now.
No.
I don't see a lot of brakes. He was featured in the video that Georgia showed on Saturday. Georgia puts its own videos out. Nolan got a little work in that video. Kirby Smart praised him a little bit, and I'm sure Kirby Smart will make sure to do the opposite really soon. He did point out that he needs to, obviously do better in run stopping or whatever. But listen, they didn't sign Nolan Smith to stop the run.
Everyone needs to do better in run stopping.
Yeah, they did not sign Nolan Smith to stop the run. No. Like they signed him to get after quarterbacks. And so it sounds like right now he's really doing that. Kirby tossed a compliment his way on Saturday. So
Georgia's a top 10 defense. How many sacks do they have?
I have not changed my tune on this one iota. I want this many or this many. I want 40 sacks.
Hold on. 50. 50.
I mean, I'd love to get 50, but I think that Georgia can be great.
Oh, you want 4? 40.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I think going from 24 to 50 would be kind of a heck of a jump. But should Georgia get 40? I think they probably should. I mean, can you imagine Georgia's averaging 48 points a game and
40 sacks?
40 sacks.
The 40-40 club?
DawgNation Daily would be a pretty fun show to be a part of.
I joke, the 40-40 club, Alabama and Clemson, the teams played in the national title last year, were both a part of the 40-40 club. 40 points, 40 sacks.
That is incredible. First of all, I'm old enough to remember when Jose Canseco broke the 40-40 barrier for the first time in Major League Baseball back in 1988. Don't think I was. Yeah, completely. But don't think I wasn't stacking those baseball cards on top of each other. I love the idea of a 40-40 club. Averaging 40 points a game and getting 40 sacks. That has to be nothing but good teams, right? There's no chance like UAB has done that. Louisiana Tech had a lot of sacks last year. There's no way. If you're scoring 40 points a game and getting 40 sacks, you've got to be a good team.
Give me a second. I believe there are only
y'all help us out with this.
So there are 4 teams. Doing a quick glance here. Yeah, there are 4 teams that were part of the 40-40 club last year. You'll get 3 of them. You should get 3 of them. One of them you will not get. And frankly, I'm kind of like, it does make sense, but I'm also very surprised.
So Bam and Clemson are obviously there.
Yep.
Did Oklahoma? They didn't have 40 sacks.
They didn't have 40 sacks.
Who would have been the third one then that you say I would have definitely gotten? 40 points, 40 sacks. I can barely remember who.
Ohio State.
Okay, that makes sense. I didn't know they had 40 sacks, but it does kind of make sense.
41.
And who is the fourth?
The Syracuse Orange.
Wow. 40.
Which, they won 10 games last year. Arguably pushed Clemson more than any other team last year.
But that hurts my argument for 40-40 being a.
Maybe still a 10-win team.
Yeah, but I mean, listen. If Georgia wins 10
You can't have them in the club.
If Georgia wins 10 games this year, it's going to be a cold December in Georgia. It's going to be a cold December in Georgia. That's really fun, though. Good stuff. We got to get off the air. Thanks all for being with us. Thanks R.S. Andrews making it all possible. Dari's and that whole team over there, R.S. Andrews, they're good sports fans. They're good football fans. They love conversations like this. That's why they bring the R.S. Andrews cool down to us every single day. So since they support us, we'd love for you to support them. Heating, air, plumbing, electric. Find them online at rsandrews.com. We got a fun week's worth of content, recruiting, spring practice, everything else coming at DawgNation.com. So please check it all out. We'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow, 10 a.m., for another episode of Dog Nation Daily Live.